Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the Austrian Circle. This is the program where we talk about the economics of freedom here on WHUS Stores 91.7 FM. So thank you very much for tuning into my show this morning. We are entering a brand new year. 2015 is upon us, and I felt like maybe we could start the year by talking a little bit about the fundamentals of the market economy. And the fundamentals of the market economy is just voluntary exchange. It's when people agree to trade with one another. They agree. They voluntarily go into the arrangement based on their own preferences, and when they agree to it, we know that both parties involved benefit from it. And the contrast to this, of course, is coercion. You can think of a thief with a gun to someone's head. Obviously, that person does not want to trade with the thief or surrender all of his money to the thief, because otherwise you wouldn't need the gun, you wouldn't need the thief, you wouldn't need the masks and, trying to hide your behavior. You would just walk up to a person and say, hey, would you like to give me all your money? Oh, you would? Oh, that's great. Wonderful. Hand it over. But obviously that person does not want to give up all their money. And so coercion versus voluntarism is the fundamental question of mankind and the fundamental question of morality, really. Is it voluntary? Is it agreed upon by both parties? If it's not, I think we really have to question it and bring it into the spotlight to examine it. Murder is only a problem because one party does not agree to the interaction. They don't want to be murdered. Thievery is only a problem because one party doesn't agree. They don't want to be stolen from, and so on and so on. So we're going to talk a little bit about voluntary exchange versus government mandates. This article is by Patrick Barron, and it was posted on Mises.org, mises.org. The basic unit of all economic activity is the uncoerced, free exchange of one economic good for another. Moreover, the decision to engage in exchange is based upon the ordinally ranked, subjective preferences of each party to the exchange. To achieve maximum satisfaction from the exchange, each party must have full ownership and control of the good that he wishes to exchange, and may dispose of his property without interference from a third party, such as a government. The exchange will take place when each party values the good to be received more than the good that he gives up. The expected, but by no means guaranteed, result is a total higher satisfaction for both parties. Any subsequent satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the exchange must accrue completely to the parties involved. The expected higher satisfaction that one or each expects may not be dependent upon harming a third party in the process. Third parties cannot create value by forcing exchange. Several observations can be deduced from the above explanation. It is not possible for a third party to direct this exchange in order to create a more satisfactory outcome. No third party has ownership of the goods to be exchanged. Therefore, no third party can hold a legitimate subjective preference upon which to base an evaluation as to the higher satisfaction to be gained. Furthermore, the higher satisfaction of any exchange cannot be quantified in any cardinal way, for each party's subjective preference is ordinal only. This rules out all utilitarian measurements of satisfaction upon which interventions may be based. Each exchange is an economic world unto itself. Compiling statistics of the number and dollar amounts of many exchanges is meaningless for other than historical purposes, both because the dollars involved are not representative of the preferences and satisfactions of others not involved in the exchange, and because the volume and dollar amounts of future exchanges are independent of past exchanges. One example, the case of ethanol. Let us examine a recent typical exchange that violates our definition of a true exchange, yet is justified by government interventionists today: subsidized, protected, and mandated use of ethanol. The use of ethanol is coerced, i.e., the government requires its mixture into gasoline. Government does not own the ethanol, so it cannot possibly hold a valid subjective preference. The parties forced to buy ethanol actually receive some dissatisfaction. Had they desired to purchase ethanol, no mandate would have been required. Because those engaging in the forced exchange did not desire the ethanol in the first place, including the dollar value of ethanol sales in statistics purporting to measure the societal value of goods exchanged in our economy is meaningless. Yet the government includes all mandated exchanges as a source of, quote, value in its own calculations. This is just one egregious example of many such measurements that are included in our GDP statistics, purporting to convince us that we have, quote, never had it so good. Another example, the Soviet economy. Our flawed view that governments can improve satisfaction caused us to misjudge the military threat of the Soviet Union for decades. Our CIA placed Western dollar values on Soviet production data to arrive at the conclusion that its economy was growing faster than that of the U.S. and would surpass U.S. GDP at some point in the not-too-distant future. Except for very small exceptions, all economic production resources in the Soviet Union were owned by the state. This does not necessarily mean that it was possible for the state to hold valid subjective preferences. For those who occupied important offices in the state held them at the sufferance of what can only be described as gang lords, who themselves had held office very tentatively. State ownership is not real ownership. Those in positions of power with responsibility over resources hold their offices for a given period of time and have little or no ability to pass their office on to their heirs. Thus, the resources eventually succumb to the law of the tragedy of the commons and are plundered to extinction. Nevertheless, the squandering of the Soviet Union's commonly held resources was tallied by our CIA as meeting legitimate demand. Professor Yuri Maltsev saw firsthand the total destruction of the Soviet economy. In Requiem for Marx, he gives a heartbreaking portrayal of the suffering of the Russian populace through state-directed, irrational central planning that did not come close to meeting the people's legitimate needs, while our CIA continued to crank out bogus statistics of the supposed strength of the Soviet economy upon which the Reagan administration based its unprecedented peacetime military expansion. Peaceful exchange allowed, violent exchange redressed. With the proviso that no exchange may harm another, as explained so well in Dr. Thomas Patrick Burke's book No Harm, Ethical Principles in a Free Market, we are led to the conclusion that no outside agency can create greater economic satisfaction than can a free and uncoerced exchange. The statistics that support such interventions are meaningless because they cannot reflect the satisfaction obtained from true, ordinarily held subjective preferences. Once this understanding is acknowledged and embraced, the consequences for the improvement of our total satisfaction are tremendous. Our economy can be unshackled from government-directed economic exchanges and regulations. That article was by Patrick Barron, and it was called Voluntary Exchange versus Government Mandates. One of the charges levied against the free market is that it is a dog-eat-dog world where the competitors are trying to outdo each other and grind their competition into the dirt. And it creates this environment where people think that there's some sort of violence happening, where people are trying to get to the top of the ladder and everybody else gets pushed down underneath the ground. But that's not really what happens at all in the market economy, as Gary Gales is going to explain in a article called The Dog-Eat-Dog Delusion. When people want to add extra oomph to negative depictions of self-owners acting without coercion, that is, market competition under capitalism, they turn to name-calling. One of the most effective forms is describing such competition as dog-eat-dog. When that characterization is accepted, the mountain of evidence in favor of voluntary social coordination can be dismissed on the grounds that it involves a vicious and ugly process so harmful to people that it outweighs any benefits. Unfortunately, dog-eat-dog imagery for market competition is entirely misleading. It not only misrepresents market competition as having properties that are absent in truly free arrangements, but those properties are essential characteristics of government, the usual solution offered to the evils of dog-eat-dog competition. Further, it frames the issue in a way that precludes most people from recognizing why the analogy fails. To begin with, dog-eat-dog is an odd way to characterize anything. I have never seen a dog eat another dog. I don't know anyone who has. In fact, some trace the phrase's origin back to the Latin canis caninum nodest, or dog does not eat dog, which says the opposite and makes more sense, as an animal may try to protect its feeding grounds against competing predators, but it does not eat those competitors. It is nonsensical to rely on an analogy to something that doesn't actually happen in animal behavior as a central premise toward condemning market systems as ruthless and hard-hearted. Market exchange is purely voluntary. The dog-eat-dog characterization of capitalist systems is the polar opposite of reality. The private property on which capitalism is based mandates solely voluntary arrangements. Since the weak do not voluntarily consent to aggression that violates their rights, it protects them against coercion based on superior ability to harm others. In Herbert Spencer's words, it is, quote, an insistence that the weak shall be guarded against the strong, which stops dog-eat-dog predation, the default setting in the absence of respect for individual rights. Further, when one sees coercion in the private sector, it represents the failure of government to deliver on the only conceivable means by which it could advance everyone's welfare, uniting citizens in mutual defense of their property to provide all a more secure basis on which to build mutually beneficial arrangements. As John Locke put it, quote, the end of government is the preservation of property, protecting all citizens' rights against predation, including that imposed by government. When force or fraud is enabled, government has rented or sold out this end to the highest political bidder. However, the problem is not in mutually acceptable arrangements, but in government that enables piracy, whose prevention is its sole defensible rationale. Dog-eat-dog describes the non-market events known as war and politics. Dog-eat-dog can be descriptive of behavior during war, which can cause desperation-induced atrocities. But war is not a market failure. It is aggression by a government or governments against others. In the process, it also involves government aggression against its own citizens through higher taxes, implicit inflation taxes, and government expropriation of resources and citizens, as with military drafts. Dog-eat-dog language is also increasingly descriptive of politics. As Bruno Leoni noted, politics has increasingly become used, quote, merely as a means of subjecting minorities in order to treat them as losers in the field, such as in war. In such a world, as Friedrich Hayek noted in The Road to Serfdom, the massive payoffs to political hegemony lead the worst to rise to the top. Along the way, we observe continued escalation of what former President Clinton called the politics of personal destruction in scorched earth electoral marches to Washington. All of the above abuses can be seen as dog-eat-dog in nature, humans predating on other humans. But they are that way because government made them so, not because they are in any way inherent in freely chosen arrangements. Despite the dog-eat-dog analogy's usefulness in describing government behavior, how has it bait-and-switched people into blaming freedom and free markets? By directing attention away from the two essential ways that market competition differs from predators in the animal world. The animal kingdom's competition is a zero-sum fight for fixed resources provided by nature. But that zero-sum fight occurs only because animals do not trade, and therefore do not produce for other animals. But people do produce for others, and all parties can then benefit via trade. That makes market competition an incredibly positive sum game in which each benefits him or herself by finding ways to benefit others, made necessary by the need to get mutual agreement. As George Reisman noted, the result is very different. One man's gain is positively other men's gain. People exchange goods because it benefits them. These core insights are of fundamental importance, and without the distraction of dog-eat-dog and other similarly mischaracterizing language, people paying the slightest attention to economics would not miss them. After all, they are the focus of the second chapter in Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, on the principle which gives occasion to the division of labor. Adam Smith there highlighted individuals' propensity to truck, barter, and exchange as, quote, common to all men and to be found in no other race of animals. And what was his illustration? Quote, nobody ever saw a dog make a fair and deliberate exchange with another dog. Other species do not make contracts, nor do they have a means of persuading others by offering or negotiating mutually beneficial voluntary arrangements. But for man, quote, the greater part of his occasional wants are supplied by treaty, by barter, and by purchase, which in turn, quote, gives occasion to the division of labor, and the massive expansion of output that makes massive expansions of consumption possible. What Smith saw was the fixed, nature-given resources that inform dog-eat-dog imagery are completely overridden by the human ability to create and exchange with others, and the consequent gains from specialization to produce more effectively for others than they can for themselves. And Smith is hardly the only economist to call attention to this. For instance, the textbook I used as an economics principles student, Eichlin and Allen's Exchange and Production, put those issues at the very core of economic analysis. Dog-eat-dog imagery does offer some insight into understanding war, politics, and the failures of government, all because of their subversion of freedom. But it makes no sense to portray economic freedom constrained to respect participants' rights as creating a desperate battle for survival where anything goes. Such I win, you lose behavior traces back to given, limited resources, which is the constraint faced only in the absence of production and voluntary exchange. But that is not at all the case with capitalism, which has done more than any other social discovery to replace such behavior with win-win possibilities. As long as people's ownership of themselves and their production is respected, that is, as long as arrangements are voluntary, production and exchange is the process by which all gain. And humans benefiting one another is a far cry from a dog-eat-dog world. That article was called The Dog-Eat-Dog Delusion, and it was written by Gary Gales and posted on Mises.org, MISES.org. So I think one of the reasons that people fall for these myths, such as the economy is a dog-eat-dog competition, or that the market caused the Great Depression, or that the government got us out of the Great Depression, or that even the recent housing crisis and the banks failing all over the place, that has anything to do with the market. I think that people believe these myths because they just don't understand much about the economy. They don't recognize what has made them the wealthiest people on the face of the planet throughout all of history. They don't understand about capital accumulation, about production, about exchange, about how money actually helps us, and how profit directs resources towards the most useful ends for the customer. These kind of concepts are just mostly unknown to people. And so I wanted to read an article by Richard Lornick, who outlines 5 priceless tips that he gave to his Uber driver. I was in an Uber car the other day, returning from a conference. I love Uber and used it for years in Chicago before returning to my hometown in Atlanta. There are a lot of amusing exposés out there contending that the majority of Uber drivers hate their jobs and feel enslaved by their corporate overlords. Virtually every driver I encounter tells me that they love working with Uber. An off-duty Uber driver once overheard me saying something about the company over lunch, and he volunteered enthusiastically that he loves his job. There was no driver rating at stake in that exchange. I've had interesting discussions in Uber cars. One driver told me he had walked a young woman into the ER minutes before picking me up. He thought she had overdosed. Another driver explained how he had escaped New Orleans just hours before Katrina hit, only to return to complete destruction. And there have been quite a few who have told me that they drive to earn money to build another business. Uber drivers are by definition entrepreneurs, and many see driving as a stepping stone to something bigger. Occasionally, Uber drivers will volunteer economic views as they relate to their business. My driver the other day, his name was Chris, even identified himself as a free market guy while talking about Uber. Naturally, this got my attention, but I decided not to spill the beans until he asked what my colleague and I do. I explained that we work for an organization called the Foundation for Economic Education, which teaches young people about the free market. Chris is a big guy, and on hearing my words, he shook the car with laughter as we drove on the interstate. Then he asked for tips. Stock tips? I asked. No, big ideas that most people don't get about the economy. I gave him those tips. I thought I would share them with you, too. Big idea number 1. Trade is win-win. My colleagues and I teach our students that trade is win-win by saying trade is made of win. I asked Chris to imagine being a customer at a local coffee shop. He wants a coffee so much that he's willing to part with $5 in order to get it. For the customer, the coffee is worth more than the money. Why else would he surrender his cash at the register? The opposite is true for the seller. $5 is worth more than the coffee. The buyer and seller exchange property rights, and each says, "Thank you." This is sometimes called the double thank you phenomenon. The transaction makes them both better off. They have created value for each other through the trade. Big idea number 2. Entrepreneurs create value. Entrepreneurs create massively greater value for society, generally, than they create in profits for themselves. An estimated 98% of the innovators' profits generated by non-farm businesses in the United States between 1948 and 2001 were never captured directly by the individual innovators or firms. Innovators' profits, or Schumpeterian profits, vary by industry. Apple did not fully capture the Schumpeterian profits generated by the debut of the iPhone, for example. Instead, the iPhone created entirely new business categories and lowered the consumer price of supercomputers that fit into your pocket. But Apple captured enough of its innovators' profits that it has an incentive to continue to innovate, and potential competitors had an incentive to enter the market. Competition lowers prices, benefiting consumers. Big idea number 3. Everything has a cost. This idea is the linchpin of what we call economic thinking. That is the application of economic concepts to help explain why people and groups make the choices that they do. Normally, we introduce this concept by calling it an opportunity cost. If all of us understood clearly how the choices we make today necessarily limit the choices available to us tomorrow, we would solve 95% of the problems caused by economic illiteracy. At the Foundation for Economic Education seminars, many students are deciding whether to go to college. Not only is there a direct cost to college, but there is also the opportunity cost of spending time cloistered in academia when you could be launching the next Facebook. In many cases, college is worth the cost, but not in every instance. We take pains at FEE to practice what we preach. We've gotten away from advertising that our seminars are free to attend and offer free accommodations and meals. Instead, we say they are offered at no charge. After all, there ain't no such thing as a free seminar. You have to sit and take it for 3 whole days, and that carries a cost. Big idea number 4. Emergent order rules. The world we live in is the product of countless interactions among individuals, not the result of some master plan. Even if there is a plan, the traditions, mores, and informal institutions that guide behavior dominate. F.A. Hayek named this phenomenon spontaneous order, but I prefer contemporary economist Russ Rupert's term emergent order. The concept goes back to Scotland, to Adam Ferguson, and later to Adam Smith's invisible hand metaphor. The invisible hand, by the way, is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in economics. It's as if those who mock it as some sort of supernatural occurrence have never heard of a metaphor, which depicts how individuals working in their own interest also create value for others. The idea boils down to this: the world we live in is the product of human action, not human design. Big idea number 5. Markets are moral. Finally, we have what is perhaps the most important tip of all when talking to young people. Commerce makes us better people. It civilizes us. It permits us opportunities to practice politeness with strangers. FEE's founder, Leonard Read, captured this concept in his famous essay, I, Pencil, and Milton Friedman popularized it in the Free to Choose TV series. The market is a process of ever-growing interconnectedness. As the market grows, our individual opportunities for specialization grow with it, and we each become wealthier through our access to goods and services we could never fathom creating ourselves. By creating value for others, we tend to become less concerned with the nationalities or races, or religions or sexual orientations of those who bring to the market the goods we depend on. A deal is a deal, and the more we become acclimated to making deals with those who are different from us, the closer we grow as human beings. This last concept is vital because students today are looking for ways to explain the world and their places in it through dimensions beyond material efficiency. Certainly, the coordination of market activities through the information conveyed by prices is superior to the commissar's desk-bound decision-making, but advocates of economic freedom must first listen to the concerns of those undiscovered libertarians who are fundamentally idealistic and decent people whose only hang-up with the free market is that it sometimes appears irrational. Why, for instance, would GM, a hallmark of American ingenuity and industry, be more valuable if it were closed? Why can't the government just give spoons to all the unemployed so that they can stay busy constructing roads? Why shouldn't fast food workers make $15 per hour? Why can't everyone have inexpensive health care? Appealing to personal values is the gateway to economic thinking that helps explain our complex world. Uber redo. The Uber phenomenon represents something important happening now in the human consciousness, and millennials, people born between 1980 and 2000 roughly, may be noticing it the most. Individuals are now free to exchange goods and services with each other around the world. They are able to take innovations such as the concept of ride-sharing and the proliferation of apps to use otherwise unproductive capital, their cars, to serve others. This is great news for our world as millennials begin to assume positions of influence and leadership and are now beginning to see a real choice between the philosophy of control versus the philosophy of freedom. That article is by Richard Lornick. It's excerpted from a speech the author made to the Discussion Club, a Bastiat Society affiliate in St. Louis, Missouri. That article was also posted on the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE.org, and they run a magazine called The Free Man, which I certainly enjoy reading. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. We've been talking a little bit about the difference between voluntary exchange and coercive interactions. On the one hand, the voluntary exchange is based on mutual agreement of benefit to both parties involved, whereas the coercive interaction is always based on win-lose, where one party wins by imposing their will on the other party, and the other party loses by getting their will imposed upon. And so we will be back next week for another episode of the Austrian Circle. Have a great week. Take care.